Multi-cloud, I think, is just the reality that people find is having competency. And the bigger you are, the more you need to use different types of cloud delivered solutions.
Welcome to the Reimagining Cyber podcast, where we share short and to the point perspectives on the cyber landscape. It's all about engaging yet casual conversations on what organizations are doing to reimagine their cyber programs while ensuring their business objectives are top priority. With my co-host, Stan Wisseman, Head of Security Strategist, I'm Rob Borrego, Chief Security Strategist, and this is Reimagining Cyber. So Stan, who do we have joining us?
Rob, our guest today is Jim Reavis, co-founder and CEO of the Cloud Security Alliance. Founded in 2008, CSA is a coalition of industry vendors, stakeholders, and thought leaders that strive to create governance models within the broader IT community and the tech industry. For many years, Jim has helped shape the industry of information security and has been named one of the top 10 cloud computing leaders. Jim, it's fantastic to have you join us today. Can you expand a little bit more on your background for our audience?
Well, gentlemen, it's my pleasure to be here, and thanks for just being sort of a wonderful supporter of Cloud Security Alliance. So, my quick and boring story is I am kind of an older person, but so graduated computer science back in the 80s and moved from working for a bank to really enjoying the technology more. And by the early 90s, I was doing a lot of systems integration, and the coolest systems integration in the early 90s was figuring out how to connect businesses to the internet. And the coolest, funnest thing about that were all of the security problems you could see happening. So about 30 years, and we didn't call it cybersecurity then, but I guess cybersecurity now, and have done a lot of different things. Typically have been an entrepreneur and built my own companies. And Cloud Security Alliance certainly was a different one, where seeing the issues I saw, that it was apparent that a nonprofit sort of neutral organization was very necessary to help lead us through some of the challenges that you could see were going to come about at that time.
Well, Jim, many of you, including myself, kind of view you as the pioneer in the area of cloud security. As you look back, over those early days, what were some of the initial indicators that drove you to create the CSA? Right? What was kind of that point in time you feel that things really started to click, and that maybe industry started realizing there's more to this cloud stuff, and we have to pay attention to the security aspects of it?
Yeah, so I think the definition of pioneers are the number of arrows they have in their back. So I guess I'm a pioneer. I think there's just I like the idea of standing on the shoulders of giants and the people that sort of influenced me. But you could see in just the early 2000s that this was coming, and the folks over at the Jericho Forum were sort of the first that really got on my radar, that they talked about deperimeterization and identity and more of a virtual view. And I'm still in contact with a few of those guys, like Paul Simmons actually leads our UK chapter, does a lot of great things. And then Dan Geer, I'd say, was a pretty significant influence. He wrote a book in the mid 2000s, which I think he wrote it for a company he was working for, but it was really profound to me, where he likened the shift in computing to evolutionary biology, and the idea that it's not sort of this slow, steady state of change. It's long periods of stasis followed by these rapid flowering of new species and changes that he described as hairpin turns. And it came from a Harvard biologist, I think. And he at that time was saying, hey, we've got all this connectivity, we've got all of this data, we've got this virtualization that's happening, and that's going to be very significant. And we're going to change to this more on-demand model. And then the third thing was there was a Harvard Business Review paper that was comparing IT to the electrification of America, where before we had a power grid, it was incumbent upon any business manufacturer to generate their own electricity. And so you would put your business alongside maybe a source of water and use that. And every organization, they had a vice president of electricity. And when the grid happened and we had that electrification, you had this on-demand access to power, and that totally changed how our nation got built and how manufacturing happened, how business grew. It just changed. It was, halfway through the Industrial Revolution, I guess, but it really created this huge flowering. And the analogy, which probably is pretty apparent to people, is well, we're procuring, building all these computers, building these castles within organizations. But with the internet now, you can see that's sort of that grid, that information grid. And now with cloud, you could see that we're going to start optimizing where we put compute resources. So they don't need to be inside of a company. They could be anywhere, and you could access them on demand. And going from, hey, a small number of people that have access to the capital to leverage compute, that this was going to create just an explosion of information. And so taking that sort of sense that something big is really going to be coming very soon, that's going to change this model of how we use compute, and it's going to be very rapid, very dynamic. My thinking was, well, what do we do in cybersecurity that's problematic? And it's that we are very hostile to change often. And I thought back to like some of the conferences I went to in 2000, 2002, that time frame. That one of the most popular giveaways were these Wi-Fi detectors that cybersecurity people would go take into their office, detect these rogue Wi-Fi access points, so that they could rip them out of the walls, throw them at the people that installed them, burn them, salt the earth. And basically that made security people sort of irrelevant, not look like they were like enabling the business. So the idea was, let's solve tomorrow's problems today. Let's start now before cloud is very huge, and let's go create some very solid, defensible best practices. So as the business is starting to use this, going from pilot to production, the security people could say yes, that this is something we can support. We understand it. We understand how to map that to our view of risk management and everything else. So the barriers, as you would expect, are just there's people that you have to drag kicking and screaming into the future. There's a lot of fear about, you have a physical perimeter for your company, and then you have an information perimeter that extends far beyond it. And this fear that you're actually creating less security, a more insecure organization, when actually you do it right. As we didn't think it then, but we know now that you actually can create a more secure organization. So timing's everything. Had a lot of great experts that, again, I respect very much, that have been very helpful and showing a lot of leadership along the way. And here we are, and we're in this new generation.
And that transformation certainly has taken place now. I mean, it's one of those things where that, as you spoke to some of the challenges that were initially there when CSA was first rolling out, a part of that value add was showing what the controls are that you need to put in place to help understand how you can secure these new environments. And over the last 15 years, we're basically to the point now where the accelerator is being pushed by most organizations and their cloud adoption strategies, right? I mean, it is enabling them now to feel comfortable that, yes, security and privacy can be addressed in these environments. That's no longer as big an obstacle. However, I'm sure there are still obstacles that we're facing. They may be different ones than we initially had, 10 plus years ago. We're past those fundamentals. What are you seeing now as some of the cybersecurity and privacy issues that we still have to cope with?
So it's interesting. And when I talk to a lot of enterprises and organizations about challenges, certainly you find that the preponderance of organizations are cloud first, where they look to the cloud for their new initiatives. But cloud is so varied right now, and you have infrastructure, these hyperscalers where enterprises build a lot of their own. applications. And then you have SaaS, where you're using essentially shrink wrap software delivered as a service. And so one thing you see that's just a big challenge is, how do we harmonize our security framework and our security controls and make that consistent across all these varied areas? Multi-cloud, I think, is just the reality that people find is having competency. And the bigger you are, the more you need to use different types of cloud delivered solutions. So that becomes a real challenge. There's, again, as you alluded to, how things are moving very rapidly. As we look at things, this is the slowest things are going to be moving for the rest of our lives. It's just the change is accelerating. And so you do find that idea of, hey, being able to shift left, being able to automate more. We're still behind the curve on automation. The level of compute that we use is growing much faster than we're producing security professionals. And so that goes back to the hiring, the workforce side, huge pain point for organizations to be able to do that. So, and again, the bigger you are, the compliance framework, if you're globalized, it's very challenging. We're seeing more and more that cybersecurity is national security around the world. And so that creates a lot of unique issues, where data sovereignty, having information in different countries, proving that, and being able to answer to a lot more masters than maybe we had before. And again, at the same time, being able to shift left and stay very well aligned with the business. So the challenges are there, and you can break it down. It goes into a lot of areas about how we run security programs, how we do software development, how we track vulnerabilities, how we track standards, how we make sure we're doing things in a consistent way. And the tools are I think very robust. But again, it's in a more dynamic environment. In a perfect world, you get 6 months to vet an application before you start using it. But we just don't have that luxury anymore.
And just following up on that governance challenge, there's the hybrid environments, multi-cloud, on-prem, and then you have the complexity of each of the CSPs. The good news is they've added a lot of cloud native kind of security controls. The bad news is you have a diverse set of functions that you have to learn, and your staff has to understand how to do things potentially in AWS or Azure, GCP. And so, ensuring that you are applying those controls, or the independent software vendor controls that would apply in those environments as well, that's a whole nother level of complexity that can introduce gaps or weaknesses, because you may not have consistency and visibility and understanding how to monitor appropriately, but also your personnel may not have the awareness they need to apply those controls consistently.
Well, I would agree. Again, maybe going back to a little bit of history, one of the things that we were wrong about when we started Cloud Security Alliance, and I think the industry, is this belief that, hey, the virtual machine is going to be this sort of atomic unit of computing, and it's going to be very easy to move your virtual machines, your workloads around between different companies, different cloud providers, or even these ideas that there's going to be spot markets like commodities. It's definitely not a commodity. And what you have seen, and it's great, is you've seen the innovation and all these unique services that the different large cloud providers are doing that are very unique in how they do server-based functions, how they do more abstraction and platform as a service and containerization. And so to me, I liken it to the previous world of, hey, are you a .NET shop or a J2E shop for your development? And in fact, you're probably both if you're big enough. And it's very important, I think, and it's very valued by organizations to have their people get that cloud provider specific training and knowledge. You should be a real expert. If AWS is the direction you're going, or if you're doing some of all, you should get that knowledge in combination with more of the neutral sorts of knowledge, like some things we do and some others, and take controls frameworks and and try to see how they map apply to all these different technology areas. There's more we need to do to have sort of uniformity, and it would be nice to have log files and things like that be more consistent across these different providers. But I think that's the whole value of an independent cybersecurity industry, to actually create some of that harmonization, because we're not going to get the major cloud providers to just sit in a room and say, okay, we're going to all do everything the same now. They're going to compete, and that's great. They're competing on security. I was on a panel with Federal Reserve with Phil Venables, who many people know was at Goldman Sachs for years, and now he's the CISO of Google Cloud. And he was just detailing like all the investment they're making in security. And he was actually very gracious about the other hyperscalers in, hey, we're all working very hard in competition to make security the differentiator.
Well, let's kind of double click on that a little bit, Jim, because we've touched upon it a little bit earlier on that, majority of organizations now, it's a cloud first methodology approach. You have some more advanced organizations that have been doing cloud for a while and now are going multi-cloud, right? Kind of hedging their bets, different service capabilities, applying better, different CSP models, which is fine. You still see, though, a lot of organizations that kind of inherently believe or think that they're going to receive kind of the umbrella security coverage from that CSP that they're contracting with. So when you kind of think about that, what are some of the best practices that CSA yourself, are really kind of driving at? Kind of what are the key elements you'd say that you have to take into consideration in kind of that shared responsibility model? Some of the elements to really understand, it's not just hand over the keys and you think you're all set. It's a lot still back on you and the onus of ensuring that you are securing your own data, no matter it being in the CSP or multi-cloud environments. It doesn't make a difference. It's still yours at the end of the day. It's your responsibility.
Yeah, you said the magic phrase, which is shared responsibility, because there's one with certain people, a lack of understanding that they do have a responsibility, which seems odd. Most people do understand there's a shared responsibility, but they don't understand to what level and what depth it is. And we did on the request of a group of financial auditors, just a little study of our STAR registry. This was actually a few years ago, and I think it still holds, is we found that the infrastructure provider really satisfied about 15% on a few of the case studies we did of the control requirements, and the other 85% were the responsibility, a combination of, if you are doing all this work yourself and you're building your own applications, it's all yours. If you're contracting a SaaS company, then it's between the SaaS company and the customer. They have the 85% responsibility. So when you look at the definition of cloud, and NIST did a great job defining that. What we did is we sort of visualized it in more of a layered model, kind of like the OSI model, where you think of the SaaS, software as a service, the full business application, that exists as layers on top of platform as a service, which exists as layers on top of infrastructure as a service. And it's a bunch of APIs. And it can be actually several companies providing different services and APIs that actually deliver that full business application. So it's like peeling those layers like an onion and understanding that, taking the control framework and understanding which are the things that are applicable. So certainly if you are developing a service inside of a cloud provider, the physical security of access to that, the hard drives, that's not within your purview, but all of the questions about how you handle the data, the decisions you make, are you going to do multi-factor authentication, all those things, that's what it's really important to understand. And so typical large company, maybe they're working with 3 big infrastructure providers, and they probably have 2 to 10,000 applications, SaaS applications. That's where they've got to be continually looking at at a high level, the security of those SaaS applications. And for the infrastructure stuff they're building, they have to build in almost all of the security. So you just got to understand, okay, what is the type of cloud service we're using? Let's take a control framework, which our cloud controls matrix. We actually try to break it down that here are controls that are relevant if you've got physical responsibility. This is if you are responsible for the provisioning of the users, or if you've got other responsibilities there, that you can sort of break it down and kind of narrow the focus. But the message is you always have some responsibility, and it could be very significant for your use of the cloud.
Jim, I want to pivot to the threats we're seeing to cloud environments. I mean, you have typical hygiene issues like you don't set the permissions properly on your S3 storage, and therefore you now have granted access to those that you didn't intend to, right? You mentioned APIs, and an API attack surface could be much broader than you expect, and threat actors can take advantage of it if it's not governed properly. What are you seeing as far as some of the difficult threat vectors hitting cloud environments, and how is CSA addressing these or recommending to organizations how to better address the newer threats?
It's a good question, and it's something that continues to be a challenge in how we think through this. But when we analyze, hey, here's all of the usage of cloud, here's the threat actors, here's where security is in place, we do find that almost all of the security problems do end up happening the further up sort of the stack, I would say, you go, where users, whether it's a SaaS company that's using this, or more likely even the cloud tenants, what they're doing, it ends up being a lot of hygiene issues, which you sort of talked about a few of those. And they may not have like very strong identity management, very robust, and it creates this risk of exposure and elevated exposure. You got to really protect admin root accounts a lot more in the cloud environment, because they tend to have access to a lot more resources. And so that becomes pretty important. But it is a lot of that. Are we doing a really good job with maintaining the gold code standard of the images we're using? We're rolling those out in the right way. Do we have that sort of automated continuous deployment? And are we using things like cloud-based functions to roll back any changes that might degrade, like the access control to the different virtual machines or other things like that? So it's a lot of identity, versioning, patching, finding the vulnerabilities, understanding that, doing threat modeling correctly for cloud, understanding where the vectors are different. We're not, thankfully, seeing at this point a lot of what we fear is these sort of deep penetrations into the infrastructure providers and moving laterally and cloud hopping. We're trying to stay very vigilant and continuing to do research in those areas. So we try to encompass a lot of this in what we call our top threats section. And it's a great area. You can find it on our website, where we talk about the most common threats that, again, have a lot of these identity, hygiene, governance issues, and then how to look at it really from using traditional risk management and threat modeling tools, but understanding the different cloud vectors on how you should think about that. And that is tending to help quite a bit. And then we're always going to be wanting to be very sophisticated, and we're really trying to encourage, from a threat intelligence perspective, to see a lot more sharing between different cloud providers, and that can be harder, but between the tenants that are using these different cloud environments. Because, hey, what may look like an attack on an Azure or an AWS or a GCP, it may be happening in multiple of those, and it may actually be an attack on a big bank that happens to be using all of those. And so understanding those sorts of things are areas that are we're somewhat immature as an industry, but we need to work more there. But, I find that organizations almost of all different sizes, if they focus on a lot of the basics in cloud hygiene, they can do very well, because, again, there's so much of it right now. That's where the bad guys are going. They're not doing these highly sophisticated row hammer memory manipulation attacks.
They don't have
with cloud
to.
providers.
They don't have to, right? I mean,
Nope.
they don't. They take advantage of the poorly maintained or patched or configured tenants, and that's what they'll go after.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. Softer targets. Yeah. Now, Jim, some of the kind of things we're hearing a lot about, and I want to hear your thoughts on it, how it applies and what you're seeing from a cloud perspective. So zero trust, right? We continuous, I mean, zero, it's been around for quite some time, but major emphasis on it, especially since last year from the government sector and the executive order as an example. The securing of the applications, right? As we're migrating again within cloud environments. So when you hear some of those kind of topics, and you even talked about some of that a little while ago, kind of threat modeling as an aspect of the application side of it. But what are you seeing as it relates to those areas around, again, zero trust and more of that securing the applications around cloud transformation?
So that's a good setup one. I have to thank you for that question. So zero trust is something we're very passionate about, and that was an announcement we made at our research summit in March. Is a zero trust advancement center. So it's kind of interesting because this has been around for quite a while. I think John Kindervag at Forrester articulated this over 10 years ago, and he was basing that on some of the other things that came out of government, and I think Jericho Forum that I mentioned previously. And I think a lot of why it's coming so popular now was actually a little bit of the pandemic driven, where you saw organizations that had what they felt were very secure environments. And then they had to move these very secure environments, maybe multi-factor authentication, key fobs with their notebooks. And then they went home into these insecure environments, and you got the teenagers over there. You got the smart home that's potentially corrupting that. And that's where I think for me anyway, we started to see a lot more interest here. So CSA's viewpoint on zero trust is it's kind of been captive of more a like product perspective of these products will provide zero trust. And it's really more of a philosophy and a strategy that if you cannot implicitly trust anything, then you have to go back and look at this system that you are trying to secure and look at those components and understand how can you create a strategy and an architecture that gives you enough built-in trust that you actually have confidence that these systems work. And so that's helping people sort of rethink things, because if you are, for example, you've got maybe a SaaS application that's a CRM that's got high net worth customers in there. You don't have control over that. It's a SaaS application. And maybe you've outsourced the call center that deals with that to another organization. So there becomes like, you understand there's a lot more of a human element. It's not down to like a network product. And how do we vet those people in the call center? And maybe there's technology for exfiltration and other stuff like that. So it's just one example where we're trying to have people go back to think about strategy, think about philosophy, and then move forward there. But I think fundamentally, zero trust, because now we've got so much technology and automation, zero trust is going to, at some point, consume all of like the architecture of the internet and cloud. I think we're going to be able to move to that model. I don't know how long that's going to take, but I think fundamentally going to go there. So we think that's really important. So the software question and how we think about that, the concerns we think about a lot are vulnerabilities. And we think we can improve software development, but this dynamic nature of it means we're always going to have vulnerabilities. We always got to have ways to manage that. We got to have a lot of transparency into like the software bill of materials and things. But if you think back to like the amount of technology we had when, for example, the MITRE CV program was started, I think 23 years ago. And the amount of technology we use now, the number of expected vulnerabilities versus the actual vulnerabilities we know about are hugely different so that tells us there's a very big problem and there's a lot of insecurities out there in our software. So that's one of those, all of industry efforts that we're going to need to do to make that better and to solve that problem. And it's not going to happen overnight.
That's a very good point, Jim. It's going to take quite some time to try to wrestle that one down. But, one of the great resources that the CSA established was the STAR program, which, again, going back to the beginning of our conversation, helped, give those guardrails to help understand how CSPs, cloud service providers, can be more secure and provide a level of evidence, right, that they've put in proper controls. Can you expand on the STAR program and the benefits it provides, as well as where it's going?
Absolutely. So the STAR program really was based on this philosophy that we, shouldn't force, and it's not sustainable to have software companies have to respond to proprietary questionnaires, assessment questionnaires from every single one of their customers, which is kind of where the world was trending towards. And let's look at more of a shared model, because those questions seem to be the same. So it's, the idea is security achieved through transparency is a great way to do that. So we started with our controls framework, the cloud controls matrix, and then our questionnaire, which is called the CAIQ. And then the STAR registry is a way to create a multi-leveled approach where you can self-assess. And a lot of people say, well, is self-assessment really valuable? But when you have to be transparent about it, when you have to publish it online where everybody, your competitors, your customers can see it, it actually creates a fair amount of rigor. And then on top of that, we have this what we call level 2, where instead of creating our own assessor network, we said, let's merge in our best practices with either the ISO 27001 certification or the SOC 2 attestation project. So all of those types of organizations that do those certifications and attestations could do one that is specific to CSA. And so that's what the STAR program consists of. We've got somewhere around 1,800 companies in there. We definitely would love to see more, but if you are a customer, this is something that's a free resource. It can greatly reduce the vendor procurement process, the assessment, the analysis. You can drill down and understand a potential service you're going to use. You can understand the security issues, and then you still may have some unique questions on your own, but it changes it from 100% to maybe 5% or 10% of the things that you need to follow up on. So, free resource. We encourage people to go use it. If you are a cloud provider and you're looking to maximize your market, you need to understand that a lot of enterprises require an organization to be in STAR if they're going to use them. So it's a great way to show that basically at the end of the day, what you're selling is trust if you are a cloud provider. And to do that, you're showing that you can be trusted, and it reduces a lot of friction. And in terms of where we're going with it, we're seeing a lot more opportunities to federate and harmonize with other industries and countries. So the nation of Italy recently, which, they're a company of maybe medium size, you would say, but instead of building their own FedRAMP, that using CSA STAR and the level 2, the third-party assessment, as this is the standard for whereby cloud services can be used by public administration ministries in Italy. And so we're seeing more of that. There's other countries as well. We recently had an announcement that the Motion Picture Association, that they're going to be partnering with us. And there was a recent announcement from the Cyber Risk Institute, which came out of BITS for the financial services industry, where the cloud controls matrix, our controls framework, is central to the cloud protection profiles that they're creating. And so basically what we are seeing is STAR federating and harmonizing a lot of other industries, nations without being a single standard, but really solving that 80% to 90% of the problem and creating a really good path where, hey, if you've done this, then you have a very small amount, even if you're either on the customer side or you're on the provider side, to be able to address more unique needs to an industry or a country. So we're pretty excited about it. A lot of investment in that, and a lot of, I think, evangelizing we're going to need to do around the world. But it's going very well, and it's really accelerating. I think we saw 40% growth last year, and we're expecting about the same this year.
Well, Jim, that's great to hear. It's exciting, right, to see that there's a program like that you've established. But just the uptake, and as you just mentioned, right, that great growth just in the past year, but helping provide some standardization, I think is critical. So great to hear that. Great to hear everything else you had to share and kind of the journey of establishing the CSA, the different things along the way, some of the latest things, and also kind of what you're looking forward to and seeing additional aspects as it relates to cloud security specifically. So thanks for coming on. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks for listening to the Reimagining Cyber podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you would like to have us cover a specific topic of interest, feel free to reach out to us, and you can find out how in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe. This podcast was brought to you by CyberRes, a micro-focused line of business, where our mission is to deliver cyber resilience by engaging people, process, and technology to protect, detect, and evolve.